So welcome everyone to this FAIRsFAIR repository support webinar. My name is Joy Davidson and I work with the DCC and I lead work package 3 in the FAIRsFAIR project. And this is the latest in a series of webinars that we've been running over the past few months, which is intended to try and help people who work in the repository area to give them some tips on how to become more FAIR enabling. So hopefully from participation in these webinars, you'll hear some practical ideas and advice for things that you can start to do to improve your own repository of service and start to become more FAIR enabling. So today's session is going to focus on the topic of metadata exchange. And we're very glad to have Claudia Martens and Annalena Flügel from DZRK in Germany. DKRZ in Germany, I got that wrong. And they are both working with B2FIND, which is UDAT's metadata indexing service and discovery portal. So we're delighted to have both of you on board today to share your practical experiences from the aggregator's point of view on metadata exchange and the kinds of things that you might have to consider. So as most of you probably know, that metadata exchange is crucial if we are to realize this sort of FAIR data ecosystem that we're all hoping to be working in and benefiting from. We need to be able to move metadata across from different repositories to be able to harvest it through aggregator systems like B2FIND and OpenAir and RE3 data and all of these other services. So understanding how we can start to do that most effectively is something I think we're all interested in. And I think hopefully over the next hour today, you'll hear from a fairly practical point of view some of the issues that you might need to bear in mind when you want to share your metadata. So the key things we're hoping that you leave today with are just hearing from some of those lessons from B2FIND. As they are an aggregator service, they have a really good experience of some of the real practical issues that you might need to consider for exchanging metadata. And hopefully hearing some of these issues, it will help you when you go back to your own place of work and start to think, what can you do in a very practical sense to start to think about improving the exchange of your own metadata. And hopefully you can pick up some tips from that. So I think the key thing we want you to do today is to kind of hear what's going on from Claudia. We would encourage you to write any comments or questions in the chat. There will be some time later on at the end of the presentation to discuss some of this. But in the meantime, feel free to put questions and comments. And Annalena said she'd very happily try to answer any questions as we go that you might have, but we'll also pick some up for the Q&A session. So before we go into Claudia's discussion, I was going to give you a couple of the boring bits here now, just a bit of the administrative stuff from FAIRsFAIR and who we are. We are a Horizon 2020 funded project. We're running from 2019 up until 2022. So we've got just over 4 months left to run on the project. We're 22 partners across all of Europe. And the emphasis for the FAIRsFAIR project is really on trying to support this uptake of a FAIR data culture and supporting the uptake of good practices. And all of that is really to help realize this vision of the European Open Science Cloud. So that's essentially what we're here to try and do. One of the key target groups for the project for us are repositories. So we address repositories in 3 out of our 7 work packages. We've got 2 that are working really one-to-one with repositories. So we've got a work package number 2, which is looking at semantics and interoperability. And work package 2 is working with 12 repositories to help them become more semantically interoperable. And we also have a work package 4, which is dedicated to helping people achieve Core Trust Seal certification. And we're working with 10 repositories to help them progress to that. And I lead, as I say, work package 3, and we are kind of looking more broadly at trying to help a broad range of repositories to become more FAIR enabling. So as part of our work, we are running these series of webinars to try and introduce some key concepts and give tips and advice. So that's a bit of background as to what we're doing in FAIRsFAIR. And now I would be quite grateful if you would go to menti.com, because we'd like to get a little bit of an idea of who's in the audience today. So if you go to menti.com and enter code 901579, oh, sorry, 59015-796. And I'm going to move to another screen. So if you can go to that Menti, we'd like to just get a little bit of a sense of who's in the audience today. So first off, we want to know what kind of a repository are you? And maybe you're not a repository at all. If you aren't, then you can let us know by clicking other. And I see we've got at least one other person there. So are you a national repository, an institutional repository, domain-specific repository? Maybe you work similar to the B2FIND team in metadata aggregation. So quite a few others in the audience, so that's great. And if you feel like putting that in the chat, we always like to get an idea of who you are. So it looks like most of the people are coming today from the institutional side and a few others, so that's great to see. I'll give it one more minute if you want to answer this question. Well, it's going up now for the institutional repositories being the key group in the audience today, so that's great. So I think we've got about 40 odd people, and I think we've got a good number of those. So I think we'll move on now to the next one. We've got a fairly good sense of who's in the room. The next question we want to get a sense from you is if you have experienced difficulties when you're trying to exchange your metadata. So yes, no, or you haven't actually even tried to exchange your metadata yet, are the possible answers you could give us here. So quite a few of you are saying that you have experienced difficulties. And I think that doesn't surprise us. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have had a session today to run it all. So that's not surprising to see that more of you are saying that you actually have experienced some difficulties. So I think the last thing we would like to know is, from those of you who have said that you have faced some issues, maybe if you want to just add in some free text and let us know the kinds of challenges that you've been facing, and we'll see if any of those resonate with some of the things we'll cover today. So exchange formats, first and foremost, are coming up, and I think I can see Claudia nodding, so I think these are things that we'll be probably coming back to a little bit later. Deciding on a joint metadata schema, I think that also rings a bell for Claudia's talk. Missing ontology, yeah, different standards, metadata mappings, loss of granularity. I think, well, there's certainly no shortage of issues coming out, so that's great. I think the metadata quality certainly is another thing that I'm sure we'll come back to at some point today. Problems getting system vendors to implement interoperable metadata schemas. That's an interesting one. I think we quite often think about the kind of open source and free stuff, but yeah, the proprietary services are certainly some things we'll have to think about as well. And this discovering and mapping vocabularies, I think that is certainly one of the things that we'll come back to in the topic. So very nice metadata, but no link to the vocabulary. That's great. Perfect. Well, I'm delighted to see that we are seeing quite a few of the topics that Claudia is going to pick up on during her talk. So feel free to continue adding on to the Menti, and we'll take note of this later and share it back with everyone after the session. But from now, I think I will stop sharing my screen and allow Claudia to take over control. And for the next 30 or 40 minutes, Claudia Martins, who is the service owner for B2FIND, is going to give you quite a bit of her personal experiences and having worked in trying to exchange metadata and to aggregate metadata from lots of different sources. She's going to give you a really kind of practical sense of the sorts of issues she's encountered, and you will hopefully benefit from her experience. And I will hand over to you, Claudia.
Yeah, I'm not sure I will answer any of those questions because we always have the same, and it's not, of course, it's not me alone. It's all people working for B2FIND. Yeah, the topic is exactly that. What problems or what issues arise when you deal with metadata. And in B2FIND, it's only one slide about what B2FIND is. Main point is that it's a discovery portal for research data, mainly data. It's also for other research output, but not for, let's say, everything. And it is evolved on really community needs. So we started with something and then went on, and then someone wanted something from that. And, so it's not a theoretical construction that was built to allow everything, but it was really evolved. We have up to now 46 communities on the productive machine and around about 1.5 million records. It's an interdisciplinary research discovery portal, and that is really tricky because it means really across all research areas, and they are very divergent. It has been developed within the first EUDAT project some 7-8 years ago. Went on to the second EUDAT phase. Then it has been the central discovery tool for EOS CUP, and it is now also an EOS service within DICE. However, the names of those European projects are, the service still is the same. But therefore, we have, for the last years, at least within the whole, on the let's say, European level, a lot of experience, and this is what we want to share. I'm afraid we won't have simple answers like do it like that, or do it like that, or don't do that. And I'm also a bit afraid that maybe some of you are, let's say, too much experienced for us. We just want to share what difficulties we had and which answers we found. Whether they are good or not, I'm not sure. Depends on how you look like. B2FIND itself works in a way that we have communities. This is what we call them. Communities at the end are the harvesting endpoints where we get the data. Not always, but in general. So could be data provider, could also be aggregators as well. It could be anything. Then we do harvest those communities. Then we do metadata ingestion, then mapping those metadata onto our own schema. And then we upload it into our web portal where you can then search for records. Issues for the harvesting part. So the question how to retrieve metadata from data provider or other offering institutions. The part of how to, when you get those metadata, what do you do with them? How do you convert them from different formats to using different schemas, using different terms, using different vocabularies? So that's semantic and syntax issues, I would say. And finally, the last part is for how to display those metadata, how to enable a good search. Unfortunately, we have so much to say that we can't do it all in this webinar. So we will mainly focus here on the first part, how to retrieve metadata, how to map it. And the other part, how the mapping interacts with what you can display then, which very much, for instance, affects questions like granularity, which is a really huge issue, will be probably explained or presented in a follow-up webinar. But maybe we have time for discussion later, and even on that issues, we will see. What we do is that at the end, since last year, we do offer the metadata we have aggregated also to OpenAIRE. So we are now we have experiences in two ways. One way, how the metadata get in, but also how we do offer or expose metadata. So we know the issues from, let's say, both sides. For the first part, harvesting. So that's the question. You have a data provider that anyhow has data with metadata, and you want to get those information harvested. How? B2FIND supports OAI PMH, which is the Open Archive Initiative Protocol for Metadata Harvesting. I'm sure all of you know them. We also do support the catalog service for the web, which is developed and also maintained, I think, by the Open Geospatial Consortium. It's, as the name says, it's for geo communities. And now something doesn't work. We have also, we do enable the harvesting via REST APIs, which is a very specific solution. We usually get the records in XML or JSON, but we do not yet support our Sparkle queries. So we are not able, well, not yet able to harvest triples. That's important because it means that a lot of information we from data provider having triple stores are not coming to us. What we learned for OAI PMH, the, let's say, advantage is that it was built for harvesting metadata, right? So it's a specific tool for doing what we want it to do. It has some features. For instance, it allows to create OAI sets, which is a useful thing when you have a data provider offering huge amounts of data, for instance, for different projects. And we will have an example for what you can do with it later. It also allows incremental harvesting with from date, and OAI PMH allows to define multiple metadata prefixes. So whatever metadata prefix you want to use, you can configure there. The default is Dublin Core because it's it evolved in the aftermath of Dublin Core. The disadvantage is OAI PMH is not supported anymore. Unfortunately, it's often stated that OAI PMH is outdated and that it doesn't represent the newest technical stuff. But the point is that it is still stable and it works. So once you've set up an OAI provider, it works and it's stable, right? And it's a bit tricky to, the setup is really tricky because you have to waste some time on it. For CSV, so the catalog service for the web, it was, as I said, specifically developed for entities used in geo communities. So everything that is related to geo data, which in itself is already so interdisciplinary, but well, the whole geo. So when you have usually some places on Earth where you have bounding boxes or any location, but also when you have vertical layer, like looking in the air. The disadvantage is that it was made for entities restricted to ISO 19115 and 19139, which is the INSPIRE directive. For those of you who are not coming from the geo community, INSPIRE is a European directive that forces institutions to use this metadata standard, this ISO standard. INSPIRE is not really good. Yeah. REST APIs. The advantage is, of course, it's an individual solution. So any data provider may have full control how they want to configure it. The disadvantage is it's an individual solution. So it means for people like us, for metadata aggregator, that we have to configure each API. In terms of standardization, it's not a good idea to do that, right? So always, if you have a standard way to expose your metadata, that's better. Because of course, other aggregators will find it more easily, and not everybody is working like B2FIND, who really puts a lot of effort in working with concrete providers or communities or infrastructures. Now, the big question behind, because as we've seen, we can't harvest triple yet, is what's the relation to old-fashioned relational databases and triple stores? This is our personal, let's say, approach. I'm not sure this, well, this is just our view. I wouldn't say it's the truth or stuff like that. Triple stores or triples were made for the semantic web, and semantic web never really evolved. So in my experience, and I have a librarian background, it is used, and it was used mainly for research data, mainly in university libraries, but not really in the huge research infrastructures. It is, of course, used within the web, sure, right? But when you see that the biggest triple store existing is the one from Amazon, so that's commercial stuff. I wouldn't say it's so widespread. In principle, linked data are a splendid idea, and I think it's the best way to really enable to show relations between metadata aspects, but it's a specific form how you do it. And I believe that especially in data intensive research, when you produce a lot of huge data, then you usually store it in a specific way. The way to expose them could be then to extract metadata and put them in a triple store, but this is effort. And I'm not sure a lot of data provider will do that. So of course, the answer is, as always, there is no one-fits-all solution. Best way is really to combine this. And unfortunately, I don't have well, in B2FIND, we have enabled harvesting triple in the beta version, but there is no one tool I can show you that does it automatically and connects everything with everything. Of course, in the future will be graphs. I'm convinced of that. The difference between, let's say, graphs and triples is mainly that you have in triples, you have really subject, predicate, object. So you have a three relational stuff. In GraphDB, you have nodes and edges, so you can make multiple to multiple relation possible. And for the EOSC, there will be a kind of discovery graph coming up within the next years. But how that will work out, I don't know. Right, next part, mapping. Mapping affects, let's say, more the syntax or semantic question. It means the metadata you get, how do you map it onto, well, your own schema or the schema from the service you have, right? So that's connection here. What we support up to now is quite a lot of schemes. For generic metadata standards, we do support a DataCite, Dublin Core, OpenAIRE, EU.core, and old-fashioned Mark XML. For thematic means that we have those Inspire directive, which is for geo communities. But again, as I said, geo is in itself such a huge community, having so many different disciplines underlying. So it's not really a specific one. It's more one part of it, one part of the whole universe, let's say. The last one here, FGDC, is like a kind of crosswalk from Dublin Core to Inspire. Specific, what we have now is some Danish archaeologists metadata. So those are the, when we implement REST APIs, then we do a specific mapping for each provider or each harvesting endpoint we get. Oh. CMDI is for linguistics. It's a modular system. For the system itself is great in terms of standardization. That's a catastrophe because you don't get the information out in a standardized way because it's modular. You can do anything with it. We want to revise that sometime when we have time. And Mark XML is the very, very old-fashioned librarian way of exchanging metadata. I don't think anyone is using it now. Right, so questions, issues. In principle, you could distinguish between the syntax and the semantics. So syntax means more the structure of the elements itself, the relation and the labeling as well, yeah, and the underlying model. So it means how do you get metadata out in which format, for instance? Do you get them as XMLs where you can then parse XMLs with XPath rules? Do you get key value pairs when it's JSON, or do you have triples? And the underlying, or not underlying, but the question where it goes to is when you have so many different schemes, and some of them are generic just showing only a part of what metadata there exists. And then you have a lot of discipline-specific metadata schemes with, well, specific elements, specific structure. Where's the equilibrium behind, right? So how much generic terms do you need to enable the discoverability of specific community-specific data? Spoiler, ongoing process, right? What is the equilibrium? You can never say someone is defining this is the equilibrium, now please stick to it. It's depending, it's processing really. And semantic at the end means which metadata term do you map onto what metadata term in your own scheme. So that's usually called crosswalks. That also affects the question of how do you include external references. And what it means is actually how do you get the content out. So the syntax is for how do you get the structure, how do you deal with the structure to get information, and semantic means how do you get the content of metadata describing data. And as I said, that pretty much depends on the core schema you are using, right? This is the B2FIND schema. As you see, it is based on data sites, but it's, as I said, evolved in a very practical manner. So what we have additional to data site is instrument, and this is coming from concrete needs. It's like a lot of communities using instruments within DICE. So the project B2FIND is part of, there will be a registry for instrument pretty soon. A lot of huge communities already use it. It's not always really standardized as we would like it to be. Actually, DataCite not yet has this element, but I was told that for the next iteration, instrument will come in the data schema as well. We have contact because we found out it's a useful element. We have metadata access. This means we are a discovery portal. We don't aim to display all data or all metadata. We just want to make them discoverable. So when people are interested in further metadata, this is specifically the case for community-specific metadata, right? When you have Inspire as metadata scheme, then you find a lot of information within those metadata which are not displayed on B2FIND because we don't have the option to display, for instance, parameters. But you can define parameters in Inspire. So like, I don't know, salinity in whatever, or temperature in whatever, Kelvin, grad, Celsius. Yeah, so that's the metadata access is important for us, where we link to the whole metadata we get. Discipline is, because we are an interdisciplinary discovery portal. Temporal coverage is because, well, also this is needed. I will say something to that later, because temporal coverage really is an issue for the future. Because it's easy when you do it for the, let's say, last 100 years, and then you can define, okay, use this we have a coverage from here to there. But if you want to combine paleoclimatic models, which go back a few million years with some high energy physics data, which have seconds or milliseconds, when you go back, you have to agree which calendar, which kind of temporal description do you rely on. So which reference system is lying behind. And the same for milliseconds, or even when you have something like a Roman Empire, that's a geolocation, but sometimes also related to time, but not clearly defined where it is, when it happened. So that's a topic. Our low barrier approach from the beginning, when B2FIND was set up, was to have as few elements mandatory as possible in order to include as many repos as possible. That was, as I said, some 8 years ago. During that period, really a lot has changed. We started with having only title and one identifier as mandatory. Now we extended it to publisher, publication year, and discipline. The discipline may also be other when there is no value in it. The simple structure, as I said before, is that we don't aim to, our first aim was not to give those metadata further, but just to enable the discoverability. So our schema is really pretty simple. We don't differentiate between title and subtitle and translated title and whatever, because we can't display it. We just have one way to display a title, which is one title. And also here, it is very practical. We take what we get. Interdisciplinary, I already said, refers to those elements, discipline and keywords, which are really crucial in order to identify content. And this schema now is the EU.core metadata schema, which already exists, but has not yet officially been published, but hopefully will within the next weeks. Right, to give you an example, what it means to have even generic standards, which are, well, generic, but still different, right? For us, a community is a community, as a community wants to be displayed. That will be in DataCite, the prefix. In OpenAIRE, it's also a community. And what differentiates EU.core and OpenAIRE from DataCite schema is that DataCite was made for registering DUIs. So, of course, the identifier type in DataCite schema is a DUI. Now, when you want to use the DataCite metadata schema, which is, I would say, the really standard, but you haven't registered DUIs, what do? A practical solution is you just use the element alternate identifier to describe your resource. Then you would, in a way, misuse the schema, because actually DataCite wants you to have a DUI, and so that element is mandatory. But on the other side, I mean, no one cares, right? You can expose your metadata with DataCite not having a DUI. Better is to use a schema that allows different types, as OpenAIRE does, and as also EU.core. So our schema allows. We have, that's later. I will show you an example later for our identifier. In contrast to DataCite and OpenAIRE, we have a specific discipline, which is usually in DataCite and OpenAIRE just subject, like keyword. We have an instrument, the others not yet. The contact is in DataCite and OpenAIRE within the contributor type. We made it that way because very often we have a generic, we can kind of fix code it in the map files for support at something when there's a generic, or we just retrieve the information when it's coming with such generic schemes as DataCite or OpenAIRE. We take it from the contributor type, or we take some information that the community tells us to do. Right, and as you see, temporal coverage and spatial coverage are just different names for what already exists in DataCite and OpenAIRE. But as I said, the temporal coverage is tricky, and I'm not sure how, well, I'm sure it will evolve. Now we have some examples, practical examples for what we do or what you can do or what we do for specific things. One example is that what you can do with OAI PMH sets is to display multiple communities when you have only one harvesting and or not only one data provider. The example here is GFZ, that's the German Geoforschungszentrum. And when you look on the right side, there is the OAI set definition. So you see there are a lot of sets. They have a specific name. So the CRC and so on, CRC database, and then it's Nmap, and then it's FitGeo. So they have subsets for different, let's say, projects. What we can do is that we just define within our map file here, so that we have this subset DOE-DB SciSnet belongs to the community geophone. And that we did for all of those, and even more. This is just an extract. And how it looks like at the end is that on the productive B2FIND, where you see the communities as a whole, you see that you have Nmap as one community. You can click on it, and then you see all the records from Nmap and the description of what Nmap is. You have it for the GFZ, German Research Center for Geosciences. You have it for Geophone. You have it for FitGeo, and even 10 more communities. So that's easy doable with OAI PMH. It's not really easy to do it with REST APIs, because then you would need to define those sets, and I'm not sure how to make that in a good way. Another example for OMI sets is that you can include specific mappings. For instance, we have here, this is an extract from a map file as well. So DARA is an aggregator for social science data. And they have about 32 or 36, I forgot, OAI sets. So what we do is that we take one set, like here, DARA GESIS data archive, and define that those are mapped to the discipline social sciences, right? The same as when we have the subset DARA RKI, which is the Robert Koch Institute, we define that the discipline is public health, service research on social medicine. So we can do specific mappings for each endpoint in OAI. And so we could even add keywords for each endpoint, for each subset. We could do a lot of stuff there. And that works easily with OAI PMH. And at the end, it looks like on the GUI, it looks like this, so that when you click off the facet discipline within DARA, right? So the community DARA is here, and then you have all those disciplines. Then you see that it is mapped to the records. Each record is mapped to that OAI endpoint where we defined it should be mapped. Right, example for identifier. Within B2FIND, we have an internal ranking for the representation of identifiers. I'm not sure this will stay as it is, but as I said, it comes from a time where DOIs were not that much used. So, and the aim of B2FIND was to represent research data even when they are not yet really good or standardized or rich, right? But just to make them searchable nonetheless. So we started to define that whatever, let's say, landing page, whether it's a URL or URN, any web resolvable identifier is sufficient for us. Then DOIs came up, and of course our internal ranking means that in the, let's say, ranking of persistency, or I don't know how to call it, a DOI is first. So if there is a DOI within the metadata, we will display a DOI. If there is another PID, we will display any other PID additional. If there is neither DOI nor PID, we will display any URL or URN that we get. Right. And an example for that is that, for instance, here, so you have a record. And as you see, this record has a DOI, additional PID, and the source then is where we get it from. So, which is at that, for that record, it's a B2Share record. And the metadata access at the end is always the get record we display again. So you can click on that and then receive all metadata. Right. Next example for discipline. Oh, yeah, discipline, really tricky. Discipline is, as I said, important for us because we are an interdisciplinary research data portal. So what we do is that we take from each record we get, we take the subjects, And then we have a script that tries to map the subjects automatically to our internal closed vocab of disciplines. Additionally, we can do some more stuff with, and this is clearly an example for semantic issues, right? So how to enhance information, how to include external stuff. The example for INRA is the data provider for, just a data provider. And they have their subjects mapped onto our discipline because this is how they wanted to have it. And how it looks like at the end is that when you have a record from INRA, and you see here, the topics are genetic resource, health and life science and medicine, then it is mapped onto the discipline life science and general genetics. Discipline is tricky insofar as I'm sure one question will be, where is our internal closed vocab of disciplines? The answer is, it is in GitHub. It was built over the last years out of need, and there has been a collaboration project together with Data for revising or developing probably a combined closed vocab for disciplines, but that is so much work that it doesn't go on as fast as we want. Yeah, I could say a lot about this, about disciplines, but I will stop here because we run out of time. Finally, another example for discipline. We have integrated again in our internal closed vocab the unified astronomy thesaurus, which is a very good idea. The example is for IVOA, which is the International Virtual Observatory Alliance. I saw that Mario was here. And what they do, this thesaurus, Astro thesaurus, they define terms and subterms and the relation of those terms. What we did is to extract just the first level and implemented that or integrated that into our internal closed vocab. So we have astrophysical process, cosmology, exoplanet, and so on and so on and so on, which means that when you search for IVOA, so this is a snapshot from the GUI of B2FIND for IVOA records, you see all those things because they are automatically mapped from the subjects which are offered via IVOA, because IVOA, some of their registries, I don't want to say something wrong here, I don't know exactly whether it's the central one or not. Anyway, they map the records onto this Astro thesaurus. So not only this one, but there are a lot of terms lying underneath, but you can look it up yourself. It's astrothesaurus.org. So we can receive those information and then automatically put it into the right category, which is a good idea, I think. Right, finally, lessons learned. Yeah, well, lessons learned. In principle, standards are great. The problem is they should be used. Now, the one experience we made was that it's not a good idea to force people to use a standard, because I'm convinced standards are used when they are necessary, when they are good, when they have a benefit. And they become a standard when they are good, right? So it's more, let's see what people use for what reasons. And when it is used, then it maybe should be in a way standardized, that it should be maintained. So they are not static. I think this is very important. And the best example is for metadata standards, of course, a Dublin core. Dublin core was developed out of need because you need a way to describe digital content, right? But Dublin core was developed from librarians, I have to say, but it was developed for publications, not for data. So DataCite as a schema evolved exactly for that need, to make research data citable, right? And so it will go on. DataCite will evolve, but DataCite now is a specific service, as I said, for registering DOIs. So you will have other schemas for specific needs. And I think it is very important to see that standards and schemas are made for a certain purpose. So there is a need to have community-specific schemes. And it's okay that they are there. It's just how do you make them interoperable with others, right? And I know that the idea is we make everything machine readable and machine actionable. We just have a lot of APIs and a lot of vocabs behind, and then the computers are doing the process for us. But from our experience, this is not reality. So it's a nice idea, but in reality, you have to do so many specific stuff. For first of all, you have to make some thinking of which standard do I use or which schema do I use? What do I want with it, right? Do I want to expose my data, metadata, or do I want to have an additional schema for us, for the specific reason or purpose? And to combine those, that's the point. And it's still humans doing a lot there, right? It's not so that machines are doing everything, not yet. The same for the schemas. And the schema is also, research data is so incredibly different. What we are not really talking about now due to time is granularity. I mean, when you have one record describing a climate model, for instance, so a CMA from climate computing modeling, there are terabytes underlying of files underneath, right? But the file itself describes the model and all the resources underlying. On the same time, you have some snippets of a nightingale, yeah, right? So how do you get those together? I mean, a snippet of an audio file for 3 seconds, and then you have maybe 20,000 snippets, or 60,000 or 80,000. But still, on the one side, you have one record describing a whole model with underlying files, which are so huge that you can't open that on a desktop computer, right? Yeah. So no answer there as well. We will see. For the schemas also, as I said, it's not a good idea to enforce something. And the point is with those whole policies and politics, I'm not sure how this will go on. Yeah, I think this is everything I already said. And I think we are so good in time that we have a lot of time for discussion, at least. Not really a lot of time, but I'm done.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Claudia. I think that was great. You covered a lot and very well on time as well. Thank you very much for that.
Right. Huh?
No, I think it was really interesting that so much of what you were saying kind of comes back to the human side of things. And I think it's important that we don't forget that standards and all the rest of it really aren't going to solve all of our problems. It's in many cases still down to people to do a lot of the hard work, and we need to find people with the skills and the time and the resources to do all this work. So I think that was a really nice reminder. There were a few questions in the chat as you were going on. I think Annalina's been trying to address them, but maybe we can just pick up on a few of them just so that you can add your thoughts to them as well. One of them was from Nina, and she was asking, how do you handle the challenge of deduplication, especially in cases where there are no PIDs available?
The short question is not at all. So we don't have a method to, it's on our list, but I mean, in theory, you can do everything with code, right? So I'm sure we would find a way, but this is, our approach is better to have a duplicate than to have none, right? I mean, it's better you find a record twice than you find no record at all, right? But,
does that answer your question, Nina, or is there anything else you wanted to add?
Thank you. Yeah, that answered my question.
Ah, perfect. Thanks. So as you can see, if you want, you can also unmute your mic as well. So thank you for demonstrating that, Nina. That's been fantastic. Okay, I think there was another question. I think it's also been addressed in the chat, but again, we'll just give you the chance to address it as well, Claudia. It was from Fadwa, who asked, since you deal with interdisciplinary metadata, do you use any classification schema? Or do you rely solely on keywords? And if yes, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so my question would be, what do you mean for what? For displaying the discipline of a community, we rely on keywords, or we do it within the map file in a specific way, as I said in the example. So again, please ask your question again. I don't understand the question.
Do you want to unmute yourself, Fadwa, or?
Yes, I can do that. Thank you. So I was just wondering, so you said that you read the subjects and from that you extract information about the discipline. Mm-hmm. So do you go further than the discipline, like doing even more in classification, discipline, research area, in that direction, or just the discipline?
Just the discipline. Do you have an example what we could do more?
So the point is, if the discipline starts at, it's the first level in the classification, and then afterwards you go beyond that into like different research fields or research topics or specific details that we can add in order to make the results in the search more specific, so that when I search for something, if I only rely on the discipline, the results may be really huge. But if I can make the filter even finer, so I can come closer to the result I want.
So maybe I will share my screen again. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So in principle, that's B2FIND, right? So you can search here for any discipline here, and we take life sciences. And then you can search within the life sciences only for keywords, right? So that's the facets you have. The discipline closed vocab itself, as you see here, is really huge. So we have a lot of, it's about 400, I think, or even more. And the problem is that the question is, which classification do you want to include? I know that for Europe, there has been the FOSS, so the fields of science, which my opinion is not a sufficient one, because it has natural sciences, I think humanities or social sciences, and then agriculture, because it is a classification built to show funding, funding from the European Union, but it was not made for scientific reasons, right? And you have, for a lot of classifications or even just vocabs for scientific areas or research areas or scientific disciplines, the problem is that people call them differently. And then the next question is, actually, do we need really a classification, or would it be sufficient to have only terms like more not really a thesaurus, but the option to have one term that could belong to different research areas. For instance, when you have any big collider, and then you make a photo from the molecular structure of a protein, then you could say, you could use that in very different disciplines, right? You could use it in biology or in cell biology, but you could use it also in some chemistry stuff, right? So where to put it? So the idea would be more to enable one record to be in different disciplines. And then it's not a classification anymore. So what you of course always can do to search in B2FIND just for here, so the free text field, and then hope you find something. But you cannot really narrow down, if that was your question. Like, you don't have a discipline where you can say this is social sciences, and then I want the economists, and then I want some monetary theory, and then I want this. This is not included here. Does it answer your question?
Thank you. Yes, it is inspiring. Thank you.
Inspiring. Oh,
well, that's great. You can't get better than that on a Thursday afternoon. I think inspiring is excellent. Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. We do have time if anybody has any last burning questions you want to ask, just feel free to put your hand up or put it in the chat. I don't see anything. So in the few minutes we have remaining, I just had a couple of summing up slides to share. So I will do that. So really, I think based on what you've said, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I think, you know, one of the things I've always been really impressed by the B2FIND team is that you're so small. I think it's the two of you, is Claudia and Annalena. So I think we've got the entire office team with us today. So you do so much with so little.
There are some good ghosts in the background still. Hi, Heiner. He's here too, I think.
That's great. But we really do appreciate you taking the time to give us your lessons learned from the practical side of the aggregator view. And I think just, you know, a couple of takeaways that I have is that, you know, aggregators take what they can get. So whatever repositories are sharing is what the aggregators can pick up and display. So a lot of it really comes down to the repositories using the standards where they exist and making sure that the quality is there. So I think we need to make sure that we're not just relying on aggregators to do magical things. The quality has to be there for that to be picked up and shared. So I think we need to kind of get to that first and make sure that that gets picked up and shared. I think your point about no one size fits all, I think, you know, we hear that time and again. It's, you know, there's no denying that we're ever going to get to this point where we have one standard that everybody uses. It's just never going to happen. So I fully agree. I think your point about the fact that we have to just focus on making interoperability happen with the standards that are already there is a good one. And again, that goes to the point of making sure you're using one of those existing standards and making sure that you're not kind of creating new things, but using the ones that are already there unless there's really good reasons for coming up with new standards. So let's put our efforts into trying to work with the ones we already have. And I think your points about automation not solving all of the problems, I think that's a really important thing for us to remember. We put so much stock in the fact that we need metadata crosswalks and we need automation and standards and all the rest of it. And they're very important, but I think your point really made me realize that we do need the people too. We're not going to get to the point where automation solves everything tomorrow or in the next 2 years or probably the next 10 years. So I think we're going to need to have people to be able to do this. So that also picks up on things like sustainability and how do we make sure that we have people who can do this at the repository side and at the aggregator side in the years to come. So I think there's a lot of work that we still have to do to make that happen. So thank you very much to both of you for coming and taking the time, for Claudia for the great presentation, and for Annalena, thank you for addressing all of the questions in the chat. We'll pick up some of the questions. If there are people who do have a few more questions, we're just about out of time, but we'll try to pick them up and do it through email remotely, and we'll share them after the fact. So I'll just say again, thanks to my colleague Saranella, who's been in the background doing all of the technical stuff. So thanks to you. And thanks very much to all of you for joining today. We really do appreciate your time in coming to join these sessions and to participate and ask your questions. We'll be uploading the presentations and the recording probably this week or early next week. So we'll send the information to you so you can come back and revisit if you want to learn anything or to share it with others. And we would appreciate, you know, we've got the Menti poll, we'll send that to you as well. We would like to hear a little bit about if any of the tips you've heard today will help you. So we'll send you that information as well. I'll just put it into the chat. But apart from that, I think it just is down to me to say thank you so much to all of you for coming today. And please keep in touch and join us for the next one of these webinars. And we'll let you know when the next B2FIND webinar on search might be coming up.
Yeah.
So thank you very
Exactly.
much. Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.